It's February 17th. We're halfway through the month of February. Whew. And you know what? We are, what, 5 weeks away from 6 weeks away from Passover. Man, it's coming quick, coming quick. I hope you're already praying about that. Hope you're already seeking the Lord on that and saying, how can I be in preparation for the greatest Exodus event that ever took place? And that's something that I have to do personally. Speaking of personal, tonight we want to take a passage and we want to really personalize it. In order to do this, what we've got to do, and this is what we have to do, we don't have any, these are non-negotiables. You can't forget where we are. You can't forget where we've been. And you've got to keep in your mind these truths, because if you don't, then everything just turns into a Sunday school lesson. And we want to make sure that this umbrella that covers us on our journey is something that we're integrating into our lives. Last week in the Torah portion, Jethro, you remember the children of Israel, they came to Mount Sinai. There at Mount Sinai, they received what we call the 10 Commandments, the 10 words. When they received those, they got pretty petrified at the Lord's presence, which always kind of makes me scratch my head for people who have frequent encounters with the Lord, and it just doesn't faze them. When I look at people in Scripture who hear his voice or have an encounter with him, they're paralyzed or they fall down like they're dead. It's always made me scratch my head. But then again, it doesn't make me scratch my head, because what the Lord does is he reveals himself to you to the degree that you're open to receive him. So when people will speak of his glory filling the room, his glory did fill the room. Now, it's not the glory that filled the temple in Isaiah chapter 6. It's not the glory that filled the tabernacle in Exodus chapter 40. It's not the glory that filled the temple when it was done being built by Solomon. It's not that glory, but it's glorious, and it's heavy, and it's weighty, and those experiences are real. What we want to do is continue to keep pressing forward in our journey so that those stories that we read about, they become even more real to us along our journey. Last week, before the children of Israel started hearing the voice of God, before they saw the thunder and saw the lightning. Remember on Shabbat, we talked about when they saw the thunder, you don't see thunder, but the word for thunder is the word for voices. And we connected that with Acts chapter 2, when the people saw on the disciples the tongues of fire dancing on their head. Well, that's what the sages described Mount Sinai was like, is that the mountain was on fire. It wasn't being consumed, and there was tongues of fire that were coming out, and they were able to hear the voice of God in their own language. The people were told to prepare themselves 3 days ahead of time. They were told to prepare themselves 3 days, wash your clothes, don't go into your honey bunny, get completely prepared for what's coming. And they were told back in chapter 19, it says that they could not, whatever they did, they couldn't allow anyone or any animal to touch the mountain. I'm looking at chapter 19, verse 12. And you shall set bounds to the people round about, saying, take heed to yourself that you do not go up into the mount or touch the border of it. Whosoever touches the mount shall surely be put to death. Okay, so get your first picture. The children of Israel have left Egypt by the blood of the Lamb. The children of Israel are following the pillar of cloud. They've been baptized in the sea. They've come up out of the sea. Their enemies have been destroyed. They've come to the waters at Marah, where they experienced bitterness. They overcame that. They came to the well of Elam. Yahweh started raining down bread from heaven. They drank from the rock. They defeated Amalek, and then they come to Mount Sinai. And the warning is, just even though God drew them to Mount Sinai, even though God brought them to Mount Sinai on eagle's wings, he says, boys and girls, you can't come up the mountain. You can't come up the mountain. In fact, if you even touch the edge of the mountain, you'll be dead. Now, to me, that just doesn't make any sense. I mean, I know the holiness of God. Actually, I don't have any clue about that holiness of God. But I was thinking the entire time that the reason why he took them out of Egypt was to have an intimate, close relationship with them, not to keep them off at arm's distance. Now, remember, what we're talking about here is we're talking about the relationship between your heavenly husband, your bridegroom king, and between his bride. So the very truths that you see with the bridegroom king and the bride are the ones that I want you to share with you and your honey bunny. So now I would think that he would want complete intimacy, complete closeness. I mean, he's gone through a lot to bring her to him, but he warns her. He says, if you get too close, you're going to die. Now, I want you to jump over to chapter 24, because in chapter 24, and so make a note that in chapter 19, verse 12, they couldn't go up the mountain. They couldn't even touch the border of the mountain. And that was Moses included. They couldn't. And when God spoke, the people shook. So remember that. That's at the beginning when they arrive at Mount Sinai. Now look at chapter 24. In chapter 24, it says in regards to the children of Israel. Now look at verse 9. This is chapter 24, verse 9. Then went up Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel. And they saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of sapphire stone, and as it were, the body of heaven in his clearness. And upon the nobles of the children of Israel he did not lay his hand. Also they saw God, and they ate and drank. Now, inquiring minds want to ask a question. And the question is, what's the difference between where they were in chapter 19 and where they are in chapter 24? In chapter 19, they weren't allowed to come up the mountain. They weren't allowed to touch the mountain. If they did, they die. What happened in chapter 24, where God now is inviting them to come up the mountain, to where Aaron and Moses and Nadab and Abihu and Joshua and the 70 all come up the mountain. What was it? What's the difference? Now listen carefully. Listen really, really carefully. The difference is that when the relationship wasn't just this way, but it was this way, it was not just vertical, spiritual, it was relational with the people. And you say, well, what do you mean? From chapter 21 through the beginning of chapter 24, there are at least 53 right rulings on how to relate to one another. Now, these right rulings, we call them mishpatim, or judgments. These right rulings, these judgments, they're very important because they all have to do with not this. They don't have to do with this. They have to do with this. Now, remember what Yeshua said in Matthew chapter 25 when he was separating the sheep from the goats at Yom Kippur? He was saying, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. When I was in prison, you visited me. When I was sick, you brought me matzo ball soup. When I was naked, you clothed me. Well, when did we see you hungry, thirsty, naked, in prison, or sick? And he says, as you did to the least of these, my brethren. Okay, now pay close attention, because that pattern is established back here in Exodus. So we have this vertical pattern where the people have come and God has spoke to them. And that's great, but just that intimacy alone, that doesn't cut it. That's why if I go back, all the way back to the book of Genesis, John Akuti, your favorite, and we go all the way back to Genesis chapter 2, and we recognize that God says it's not good for man to be alone. And you just say, well, wait a minute. Man wasn't alone. He had God. He had all the animals. He had a garden that was amazing. He had a river. He had gold. He had everything that he could possibly ever want. But it wasn't good for him to be alone unless he had a honey bunny. So now here the children of Israel are. They've been wooed by their bridegroom king. They've been brought to Mount Sinai. He appears to them. He speaks to them. They're able to hear the thunder and the lightning. They're hearing a voice of intimacy. That intimate voice that's dealing with the vertical relationship has boundaries that they can't get too close or they're going to die. But the minute he connects the relationship physically with one another, and the people say, everything that you say, we will do, we'll obey it, and even if we don't understand it, we're going to do it, then from that point forward, they were able to go up the mountain. How does that work? How does that work with your honey bunny? Well, whenever we're dealing just in the vertical relationship with our relationship with God, there's obviously a separation right there. But what is it that makes this more accessible? If all as it is just spiritual hyperbole, spiritual mumbo jumbo, just using all of the correct terminology, there's no intimacy. But the minute I begin to understand that my relationship this way is a mirror of my relationship this way, now I can understand all of the judgments, all the right rulings that he gives in Exodus chapter 21, 22, and 23. The 53 different rulings that he gives. And when the people hear all of those, then go back to chapter 24 and look at verse 3. After Moses has get done sharing all of these judgments, all of these right rulings, how do I deal with the relationships with one another? Oh, I deal with them like this. I deal with them like this. I deal with them like this. Oh, okay, I understand. You're telling me things that you want me to live this way. And when I live them this way, then it causes me to grow closer to you this way. And I'm able to come up the mountain and even see you and even eat in your presence and drink in your presence. But what did the people say after Moses got done? Look at verse 3. Verse 3, it says, and Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the judgments. And all the people answered with one voice. One voice. Amazing. Kind of like it was in the Church of Acts. All of the people were of one accord, one mind, one heart, studying one doctrine, worshiping one God, one faith, one Lord, one baptism. All the people were of one voice. And whatever comes from your voice comes from your heart. Because it's out of the abundance of the mouth that the heart speaks. And one voice doesn't just say, okay, we're going to sing the same song and we're all going to sing melody and harmony and make it sound beautiful. No, one voice means this is our confession. This is what we say. And whatever comes from your lips is what's in your heart. And whatever comes from your lips is what determines the way that you walk. Now, you can speak from your lips and you can walk completely different, but that doesn't create intimacy. It's when I treat my relationships this way that create the intimacy this way. And with one voice, they said, all that you say, we will do. Now look at verse 8. Jump down a few verses. I'll go to verse 7. And he took the book of the covenant and he read it in the audience of the people. And they said, all that the Lord has said will we do and will hear and will be obedient, will obey. Now, when you and I read that, you would think that it would read reverse. Everything that you say, we will obey and we will do it. But that's not what they say. They say, everything that you say, we will do it. And then we will be observant of it. We'll obey it. And you go, well, what's the difference? The difference is when you begin to trust somebody, listen really, really carefully. This is so important. When you begin to trust somebody, you know they're not going to lead you astray. You know they're not going to tell you to do something that's not correct. You know they're only going to tell you things that are beneficial for them. So they're willing to do it, even if they don't understand it. When my kids were young, they knew that their mom and dad loved them very much. And when we told them to do something, we told them to do it, and we didn't have to tell them twice. My kids learned very, very quickly. If dad says it, we better do it right now. There was no counting to 10. There was no counting to 3. There was no saying, how many times do I have to tell you? It was once. And if the kids didn't move and go get it done, well, then there was reckoning that had to be done. We wanted to make sure that there was clear communication. And when they were willing to do all that we said, even if they didn't understand it, we always took the time to explain to them why we do what we do. But sometimes you can't tell them why you're doing it when you're doing it. You just have to say, look, there's a car coming, get out of the road, hurry up. Well, why? Get out of the road. And when we learn to be obedient when the Lord speaks, when we learn to be obedient and handle things towards one another the way that God has given it to us in these judgments, in these right rulings, then the intimacy increases. So the first lesson for tonight is, in my relationship with my spouse, if all of my relationship is only vertical, it's only spiritual jargon, it's only, wow, God is amazing, but I can't get close to him. Well, then you're going to be like Adam in the garden, and it's not good for man to be alone. But when you open your heart in the deepest way to receive his judgments, his right rulings, his mishpatim on how to relate to one another in all the different events that he describes in this section, then you go, wow, his wisdom is amazing. Oh, now I know my relationships this way are what determine my intimacy this way. So instead of being bordered off by a boundary that I can't get close to, now I have access to go up the mountain and even to eat in his presence. Wow. That's what I want. That's what I want. That's what I want in my relationships, because I know if I'm treating you well, and I know I'm listening to you well, and I know you only want the best for me, and I only want the best for you, then when you're sharing things with me, I'm willing to do it because I know you would never ask me to do something that wouldn't be beneficial. I don't have to sit there and argue about it. I'll just do it because that's the right thing. And when I'm doing it this way, as you do it to the least of these, my brethren, so you do it to me, Yeshua said. Hopefully you can see. That's how you move from being outside with boundaries and moving up the mountain towards his presence in intimacy, and seeing him seated upon his throne, upon the sapphire, which is what the 2 tablets of stone were made out of, sapphire blocks. And the throne of God is built on mercy and truth. So the more that I treat you the way that God designed our relationship to be, the more intimate I become, and the more mercy and truth are revealed to me. And as 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 2 and 3 and 4 tell us, that grace and truth are multiplied into my life, not added, multiplied into my life through a mature experiential knowledge of the Lord. So if I'm living out the scriptures towards you, then my relationship here becomes more intimate. Okay, hopefully that's got you to where you're going. Okay, that was his first challenge for us this evening. First challenge was, in my relationship with my honey bunny, can I say that these truths of Exodus chapter 21, 22, and 23, these 3 chapters of 53 things, can I say that in our relationship that I'm being obedient to those? Because if I am towards my honey bunny on earth, then I know that my intimacy with my honey bunny in the heavenly realm is going to be brought together. So let's go back to chapter 21 and let's really bring home, like, peel the layer, peel the layer, peel the layer off to where people go, wow. Because you always want to leave your time with God in the Word. You always want to leave going, oh my stars, you did it to me again, God. You did it to me again. You just blew my mind, showing me things that, wow. And then you get to peel another layer and another layer. And then you start living it more intimately with one another. And then you grow closer this way. That's why Yeshua said the things that he said. That's why it's so important to be a doer of the word towards one another. And that's why the role of the Edzer Kenegdo is the Edzer Kenegdo. So if we were to take a look at Exodus chapter 21, 22, and 23, and we were going to look at all 53 of these judgments, these mishpatim, these right rulings, we'd find out that that's exactly how God treats us. So if that's the way that God treats us, that's how we should treat one another. So if I'm treating you this way, then obviously I'm treating him that way. And then what happens to my relationship? The two become one flesh. Now remember, he is your bridegroom king. And you are his bride. And you are to be a mirror to your bridegroom king. And so because he's without error, without flaw, perfect beyond compare, then my life should mirror what I see in my spouse. And so therefore, as I'm encircling him and protecting his name and who he is, I am reflecting intimately back to his face who he is. That's how you know that we're really walking in tune with the Lord. That's how the whole world knows that you're walking. So if the scripture makes it clear that God is light and in him is no darkness at all, okay, and I'm supposed to be the light of the world, then it must be because as his honey bunny, I'm reflecting his beautiful light for the world to be able to see, to dispel the darkness and to show people the path to him. And that's what this whole section's about. It's about our relationship with him modeled in our marital relationships this way. And that's why, literally, you could take just all 53 of these commandments and you could spend the rest of your life on them. I'm telling you, I've been looking at these for over 40 years. And I can tell you, I still haven't mined them. I've got a long way to go. It seems every rootin' tootin' year, God says, oh, you didn't see that? And I went, it's been there the whole time? And he goes, it's been there the whole time. But I wasn't prepared for it. Do you know how you get prepared for more of him? It's living out the relationships the way that God wants you to live them, according to his word, according to the way that he treats you. That's how you treat one another. Simple. That's why the two become echad basar. That's why the two become one flesh. That's why the two become one gospel. Hopefully you're getting that picture. So now look at chapter 21. Do you see how it begins here? Now, the King James reads in verse 1, now these are the judgments which you shall set before them. Now, when you and I read this in just plain English, it just seems like, okay, well, we're still at Mount Sinai, but you know what? We've had this incredible encounter with God. We've told Moses, we don't want to hear God's voice anymore. We just want to hear your voice. He scares the EBGBs out of us. He says, now these are the judgments. Now, if I was showing this to you in Hebrew, you would see the letter Vav. It's for the word and. So the King James has the word now, but the Hebrew text says and. And it says V for the Vav, Ele. If I was going to write it for your notes, it'd be E-L-L-E. Ve'ele. And so you say, well, what does that mean? And these are. That's what it says. So, and these are what? Anytime you see the word and, you know it's a conjunction. I remember when I was a little kid. Conjunction, junction, what's your function? You remember that? Okay, you had words that connect, like and. So if I said, you know, today was a good day and I'm really excited for a good night's rest. Well, I'm connecting the two. If I said, dinner was great, but, well, then that's a disjunctive. And is a connector, but is a disjunctive. That's why be careful of this. Anytime you're in a conversation with somebody, be careful how you use the word but. Because the minute you use the word but is the minute you just negated everything that was just said. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da, but you just wiped it all off the page. And these are the judgments. Ve'ele mishpatim. So what does that mean? Well, you remember we just had the 10 words. We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We've paired them up on 2 tablets. We've paired them up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We've paired them up 1 with 6, 2 with 7, 3 with 8, 4 with 9, 5 with 10. We've paired those up. We've simplified everything down to one word, and that word is respect. But those 10, if I just leave those things at 10, what does it mean to have no other gods before me? What does it mean to not make any graven images? What does it mean to not take the name of the Lord your God in vain? What does it mean to remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy? What does it mean to honor your mother and father? Or you shall not murder, or you shall not commit adultery, or you shall not steal, or you shall not bear false witness, or you shall not covet your neighbor's wife or your neighbor's possessions? What are those? Do you see this phrase at the beginning? And these are the judgments. They're directly connected to the 10. So if I was going to give you a picture, almost like a pyramid. So picture a pyramid, especially for your notes. So at the top of the pyramid, where everything comes together, in one point, there's only one God. Hear, O Israel. Hear, O Israel. That's number one. I'm the Lord, your God. I'm the one who brought you out of Egypt. Okay, that's the beginning point. Now he says, there's 2. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and might. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, great. Those are the 2. And all the law and the prophets hang on these. Then underneath those 2, loving the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and might, and loving your neighbor as yourself, then you have the first 5, and then you have the second 5. So now I've got 10 words to guide me. And then underneath those 10, if we took the time to do it, which we've done in years past, but we're not going to tonight or anytime this week, we could take these 53 and we could fit them underneath the 10. And we could find the spots where they belong underneath there. And everything that fits underneath there, the old 603 more commandments, they all fit in these categories. That's why Yeshua himself said, all the law and the prophets, they hang on these two. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and might. Love your neighbors yourself. Then you got the 10. Then you got the 613. And these 53 are what fit in. So when it starts out, and these are the judgments, it's connecting it to the big 10, what we call the 10 commandments. Okay. So what's next? Look at what he says at the end of verse 1. After he says, and these are the judgments which you shall set before them. Now, when I read this in English, I go, oh, okay, well, just present it to them. Just let them know that that's what I'm telling you. That's not what it says in the Hebrew. In the Hebrew, it gives you this picture. When you set it before them, it's a picture of a buffet. It's a picture of a huge banquet. It's a picture of all of this delicious food. All of this stuff is in front of them. So what he's doing is he's setting before your face, before your panim, he's setting before you all of these wonderful, delicious instructions so that you can have the best relationships with people, so that life will taste the sweetest and the best and the most filling and the most nutritious and the healthy that it can possibly be, so that your relationship with him can become more intimate. That's what he's telling you. I'm going to set before you as though we're going to Fur's cafeteria and you've got all of this food. The problem is at Fur's cafeteria, when you're checking out and you're bringing your tray, guess what they've got right there at the end of the place? They've got all these desserts sitting in front of you. And then, of course, the soda fountains and all that kind of stuff. And they want you to get that and make sure that you get your desserts. But what God does is God lays out for you all these different, wonderful, nutritious, and delicious, savory meals, these instructions that if you feed on them, they're going to give you energy to love one another so that you can grow in intimacy and go up the mountain and eat in his presence while you even speak to him, see him there seated upon his throne. Amazing. And this is what God does. Mind-boggling. Why would I ever want to miss out on more of this? The reason why I do, this is me, because I'm a little bit loony in the head. But the more that I'm in my right mind, the more I want to feed on what he has to give me so that I can display it more this way, so I can be more intimate this way. That's his beauty. That's what he wants. So then what he does is he begins to lay out these commandments on how to deal with people. And do you know what he does first? He deals with a slave. He deals with slaves. But the word slaves is really not the best word. When it says a Hebrew servant, it is a Evan Ivri. It is a individual who is a servant, somebody who's indentured. He's a Hebrew. He's somebody who's crossed over, but he's a servant. And what I want to help you understand, I want to insert a comment here. Now, I don't talk to you about this very often, but I'm going to lay something out for you. And I want you to just soak it up and sponge it up. I'm going to make a statement. Now, I've addressed this in years past, but I don't ever focus my attention on it because it's almost like it's a taboo. I want to let you know it's 100% impossible, 100% impossible for you to understand the written Torah without the oral Torah. 100% impossible. You can't do it. Because if all you do is you just read this and you think it's what it said, and you don't understand the rulings that go behind it, that come through the Sanhedrin that Moses established back in chapter 18, if you don't understand the painstaking process that judgments were gone through, not corrupt like our judicial system in America, but the corruption is done away with the Sanhedrin. And they had two separate courts. They had a court of 21 individuals, which would handle cases that were pretty challenging. But if they ever got past that, then they would go to the big dogs. And the big dogs, they would wrestle over every nuance. Do you know what they would do? In order to try to find the person innocent. Because the stipulations on some of these things are like, and that's why you don't find those judgments being accomplished anywhere in the Word of God. Because the Sanhedrin, who knew the Torah inside and out. For instance, if I was just going to deal with the written law, then when I get over to verse 24 of this same chapter, so I'm looking at chapter 21, verse 24, when it says an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, if I was just going to read that and say, well, that's what the Word of God says, I was at work and Billy Bob was responsible for plucking out my eye. Come here, Billy Bob. And I pluck out his eye. But you don't have any commentary, do you? You don't have any instructions there, do you? No, you don't. How do you slaughter an animal? How do you prepare the altar? How do you mix the oils together? How do you do this? How do you mix the incense? If you don't have the instructions that were given to Moses, that he taught to the judges to be able to determine the right rulings, then I'll tell you what will happen. You're going to become bitter. You're going to become hard. You're going to think that God is cruel. And you're going to say, why would he do that? Like, for instance, the next set of commands is if a father sells his daughter, and you go, oh, who would ever do that? But if I don't understand the culture, if I don't understand the setting, if I don't understand the reason why he would do it, if I don't see the end game of everything that is being stated in the Mishpatim, I'm going to think, oh my stars, who would ever do something like that? Sell their daughter? But if I know the spirit behind the commandments, and the spirit you find in the oral Torah. Now, the problem with most people, and let me tell you, this is most people. Most people get bent out of shape whenever they hear the oral Torah because they think the sages who painstakingly search these things out. And by the way, what you probably don't know is that the oral Torah wasn't just a bunch of good old boys in their man caves, just kind of chewing the fat on scripture. No. These were like judicial hearings where they would sit and they would hash out the scriptures, taking apart the Hebrew, looking at the context, doing everything. And I can validate this because I've read it. There isn't a single statement in the oral Torah which will lead you away from the written Torah. And I want to let you know that the written Torah always has precedence over the oral Torah. Nobody can be put to death over a ruling of a man. But the Torah says some people need to be put to death. So I wanted to throw that in there just as kind of something to consider. Just put that on the back of your mind. And you'll say, well, I would just never do that. And I tell people who are a little bit arrogant and really don't know up from down when it comes to spiritual stuff, and I mean up from down. I say, well, do you ever read Charles Stanley or Chuck Swindoll or Max Lucado or John R. Rice or Charles Spurgeon? Or you ever read any? Oh yeah, they're amazing. I go, what's the difference? You're reading commentaries on verses. The problem that I've got with the most modern day preachers is they don't even know their history. They don't know the culture. They definitely don't know the language, and they don't know the nuances. So I personally would rather trust somebody who is a sage, who spent his entire life memorizing the Torah, searching it painstakingly 8 hours at a time, versus the way that, evangelical Christianity has become these days, to where the pastor has to do this job, this job, this job, this job, this job. And as I've talked with other pastors here within the past couple of months, I say, well, how much time do you get to spend in preparation for your teachings on Sunday? Oh, usually I don't get to it until like Saturday night. I'm going, holy schmoles. We're either too busy, which is usually the case, or we don't prioritize the Word of God. And I think to myself, in the 21st century, we have more access to more documents, more research, more insights, more anything than in the history of the world. And yet, I would venture to say, modern day evangelical Christianity is dumber than it's ever been in the history of the world. More stupido than ever, knowing less than ever. If I said, quote for me 50 scriptures, I'll take 100 people. I bet you couldn't get one. But if we went back 100 years and you told a grade school kid back in the early 1900s that was homeschooled, they could quote entire books for you. We've been dummied down. And the problem is because we've got it all at our fingertips. We don't even have to think anymore. Everybody does our thinking for us. Just watch this video, just watch this, just read that article, just do this, just do that. We don't even think anymore. We don't even have our own belief system. And therefore, we're not even hungry for the Word. And you know what? That explains this. And it explains this. And it explains why I'm like this. I challenged a lady at lunch on Sunday. She was really intriguing me with the things that she was learning. Really, I was so happy, so proud of this lady. And I told her, I said, can I put a challenge before you? I said, do you really want the Word of God to come alive the way that you're studying it? And she goes, yeah. I said, just memorize the Hebrew alphabet and learn how to write it. I said, just do that for me and watch what happens. And she said, I'll do it. And before I saw her leave on our Sunday visit, she said, I'm going to do it. I said, I believe you. I said, now get your husband to join you. Well, he's not as concerned about it. I said, get him hungry for it. Just do it. Tell him, let's do this together. You know how hard it is to memorize 22 letters? Not very hard. You know how hard it is to, write it out? You know how hard that is? Not very hard. But could you imagine? Could you imagine the insights that God would give to you if you knew the Aleph Tav, if you knew the letters that make up all of creation? Oh, it'd be the bomb diggity. So let's go to chapter 21 now that we've connected this with the 10. So far we've done two things. And I'm just going to talk to you about one mishpatim, about one judgment. So far we've done two things. We've talked about how God brought us to Egypt but I mean, from Egypt to Mount Sinai, but we had to stay on this boundary because the only thing that we had was the relationship this way. And God said, you can't get too close to me. But what is the key to getting close to God? Learning what God has done towards me and now doing it towards one another. And that's what creates the intimacy with God. So that was the first lesson we've learned. Then I said, now compare that to your relationship with your spouse. What he's done to you, you do them, and this is what creates the intimacy. Now, are the two of you becoming one flesh, or is it just spiritual? If it's just spiritual, then we kind of maintain this distance because it doesn't become real. But if I'm doing it to where, oh, you know what? Hey, this scripture today, let's focus on putting this into practice today. Okay, let's do this. And then what you do, now this is what I've had people teach me to do this, and this is what I used to do when my kids were knee-high to a grasshopper. I would say to them, I'd say, okay, we'd have our morning study together. We would enjoy our time together. We'd have lighthearted moments. Dad would tell funny stories. We'd have all kinds of wonderful things. I'd say, okay, here's what we need to do. Today, I want you to go through the day and let's meditate on this one thought. So the kids would get little 3x5 cards. They'd stick it in their pocket here, or their pocket in their pocket, or in their purse, or whatever. And then they would carry it with them. And then every once in a while, they'd pull it out and they'd look at it and they'd think about it, because at dinner time, we would talk about it. I'd say, okay, well, how'd you guys do? We focused on one thing today. Did you get to put it into practice? Did you run into any problems? Did your mind get too busy to where you didn't even give any consideration to it? Well, one would say, oh yeah, I thought about it today. I was talking with Billy Bob at school and da 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 da. And then that's communication. That's what a table's all about. The table is to talk about God. That's why you eat and break bread together. You break bread, physical bread, so that you can break the spiritual bread. That's what breaking bread's all about. It's not just having a good meal. Who would have ever thunk? So now look at the first judgment he gives to us. Bizarre. Why would he start with this? Well, he's going to talk about a Hebrew slave. Now, when I say a Hebrew slave, I'm talking about there was one of two reasons why a person would be in this position. Number one, he stole something. And then he got caught stealing that thing, but he couldn't repay it. So let's say that I stole $500 from you. And so you saw that I stole $500 from you. Okay, but I can't pay $500. So Johnny over here knows that I stole $500 from you. So what Johnny does is he says, okay, Alan stole $500 because he needed $500. But he doesn't have $500 to pay Bill. So Johnny pays Bill $500. And now I become a servant to him. But the servant here is not a slave. It's not a slave like, okay, you're going to have to sweep the floors, or you're going to have to wash the dishes, or you're going to have to, put toilet paper on the toilet rolls. That's not the type. It would be skilled labor. You'd be building things. You wouldn't be treated as a slave. That was number one rule. The second reason that somebody would ever be in this position is if he was so broke. He was so broke, he couldn't even pay attention. That's how broke he is. That's pretty broke. So then the person takes that person in. And if he can't pay off his debts, then that person pays off his debts, and then he comes and he works for him for 6 years. Now, you say, why in the world would God start with this as a judgment? Because he wants us to know that the way that we treat people is very, very important. But they're not treated like you were when you were a slave back in Egypt. This is an Evan Avery. This is an individual who is going to be a servant. He's indentured to you. He owes you. Now, the Apostle Paul said, owe no man anything but to love one another. Now, all the same time, I want you to be thinking about this relationship. So I think all of us probably know, like from 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 19, which I put in your study this morning, that you are the dwelling place, the temple of the Holy Ghost. You've been bought with a price, verse 20. Therefore, glorify God in your body, which is his. So literally, you were once a slave in Egypt, but God delivered you out of that and he brought you to Mount Sinai on eagle's wings. Now he recognizes that you're broke. You have nothing. So he pays your debt and you become a slave to him, a servant to him, but not for doing the menial tasks. Now, what's interesting is that the individual who becomes a Evan Ivri, a Hebrew servant, do you know what the rule is? The rule that the sages would always say is, whenever you buy a servant, you now just bought a master. What? Now think about this. The way that the Torah lines out slavery is if somebody buys me because I have a debt that I cannot pay, then my position within their house is equal to that of the master. So when the master buys a servant, the servant now has a master. In other words, if the master has 2 pillows, I have to have 2 pillows. If the master eats steak and eggs, I get to eat steak and eggs. The master is obligated by the Torah to treat me equivalently to what he lives in his own house. You say, wow, that's the kind of slavery I want. Now pay close attention. The one who has bought me, the things that he has, he makes available to me. And I can serve him doing the tasks that he wants because I'm no longer my own. I'm bought with a price. Therefore, I'm to glorify God in this body, which is his. The slave doesn't belong to himself. He belongs to his master. But now that he belongs to his master, the master has to treat him like he's the master. He can't just give him a task like you need to go clean the septic tank. Okay, you need to go out and slop the pigs. No, it wasn't doing just the menial chores. It was doing a skill set. And you'll say, well, why in the world would he even do this? Listen very carefully. Because if you don't understand the spirit behind these commandments, then all of a sudden you go, oh, I don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. But the purpose behind it is at the end of 6 years, in the 7th year, that individual is set free. Set free for what? Set free to do what? How is he going to be set free? Now listen very carefully. It was mandatory for the master who bought the slave, get the picture, the master who bought the slave, after 6 years, after 6,000 years, to set this servant free. But before he could set him free, he had to make sure that he had everything that he needed so that he would never go into debt again, that he would never find himself in the same position, that he could now, 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 4, now he could literally take the mercy that he's received and display it into the lives of other people. Now let's read and see if this makes sense to you. If you buy a Hebrew servant, 6 years he will serve, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. He goes out free, debt's completely paid off. Now, by the way, he can pay off his debt earlier. He's not bound to stay there for 6 years. And the master can't take advantage of him, because if the master is taking advantage of him and using him for slave labor, then the Sanhedrin will see what's going on and they'll reprimand the master. I mean, talk about a system. But what's the purpose for it? Okay, the guy's in debt. The guy's got to pay a debt. The guy had his debt paid for by a master. The master now purchased him. Are you getting the picture? There was a debt that was owed. The master paid it. So now I have to pay back the master. So now I'm going to pay back this master, and I'm going to work for 6 years. In the 7th year, the Shemitah year, I'm going to be set free. Or in the Yovel year, I'm going to be set free. If he came in by himself, then he goes out by himself. If he's married, then his wife shall go out with him. So if I was a single man and I got purchased, if I'm single going in and I'm single going out, well, then I go out just as I came in. If I was married when I came in, then I'll be married when I go out. That means that my master not only had to purchase me, but he had to purchase my wife. If I had 6 kids, he not only purchased me, he purchased my wife, and he purchased my kids. And he had to make sure that all of our needs were taken care of while I was working for him. And you go, what a crazy backwards system. Oh, no, 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 no. There's valuable lessons. There's valuable lessons. Pay attention to what lessons are being told to you. So he says, if his master has given him a wife, and she's borne him sons or daughters, the wife of her children shall be your master's, and he shall go out by himself. Now you say, well, this is not good at all. See, this is why I don't like this Torah stuff. Okay, all right, so I understand that if he's bought and he's a single guy and he's bought by the master, that his master is going to give him a wife. And then if he has children, then when he leaves, the wife stays behind and the children stay behind. You go, that doesn't make any sense. That seems like you're splitting up a family. It seems like you're creating division. But no, the woman who is given is not a Hebrew woman. She's a Gentile woman. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details of this, okay? But I'm just going to let you know that the master is making an investment into the life of the individual who owes him a debt, and so he's allowing him to reproduce, and the reproduction that he does stays with the master who gave him those things. Just as there is a master who will give to us the opportunity to reproduce, and it all belongs to the master. It's mind-boggling for us in a Western culture to even consider. But when you stop to think about it and you go, okay, well, I can understand why the master's investing like that. And the master said, I provided this for you. Now you had your companionship. Now you have this. Now you produce these children in the 6 years that you were with me. Okay, great. Those are mine. And the man knows it from the get-go. It's not like, surprise, surprise. The man knows from the get-go. And you say, well, where are you getting all this stuff from? You read the oral Torah and you read the rules that were laid out by the Sanhedrin from Exodus chapter 18, and all of a sudden you start reading through the Talmud and you go, huh, man, God thought of everything, didn't he? And there's some things in there that you just scratch your head and said, I don't understand what that means. And that's the way that I am. I mean, here I work up at Faith Works health clinic, and there's things that go on around here. I have no idea. I don't know how that works. But you know what? It works. I'll learn. It's the same way it is with Yahweh. So then it says, and if your servant, now verse 5 is very strange. Now pay close attention, because this is where, in my personal opinion, people get it completely wrong. And if the servant shall plainly say, oh, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I'm not going to go out free. So here's this servant who came in single, but he got a wife and he got children. And now he says, I love my master. I'm not going out free. I've served my 6 years maximum. 7th year, I'm going out free. The master's given me everything that I need to go start my own business, to get started on my own feet. I don't want to go because I love my wife and I love my children. You just say, well, that would make complete sense. And he says, so then his master shall bring him to the judges. to the shafat, to the shoftim. That's why this is called mishpatim. To the judges, and he shall also bring him to the door, or unto the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. Now, 99.9% of all people say this is a good thing. I'm telling you, it's not a good thing. The reason why I'm telling you it's not a good thing is because why does he really want to stay? Well, I know he said he loves his wife and he loves his children, but what does he really love? The free ride. See, the door represents the pathway to opportunity. See, the purpose behind the previous 6 years was for him to learn a valuable lesson from somebody who knew what they were doing when it came to handling finances, handling people, serving, loving, and helping a person grow, so that they could go out the door. But what this servant does, he goes, oh, no, I love everything my master's provided, and I don't want to go out there and create an independent lifestyle, and I don't want to go out there and do this, and I definitely don't want to be the guy who has to help other people. I would rather it be done for me. This is called spiritual socialism. It's rampant. And our United States government is really big on it, but it's getting cleaned up. Praise Yahweh. So when he's taken to the door and his ear is bored through, and then he has a ring put in his ear. This is going to be important, because later on, we're going to see rings being broken out of people's ears, and it's going to be made into a golden calf. Very interesting, Professor Dumpling. He doesn't want to leave. Why would I? I'm not slopping the pigs. I'm not cleaning chicken poop with a pitchfork into a wind. I'm not doing any of that kind of stuff. I'm not cleaning out the septic tank. I'm not. I've learned skills. I've learned trades. I've learned all kinds of things. I can do all those different types of things. Go, be independent, be on my own, do what has been done to me and to the lives of other people. Don't want it. And that's what we'll finish for tonight. So I really want you to think about 3 things. The 3 things are your relationship with you and your honey bunny, your relationship in regards to look at where you were, look at where God's brought you. How's this relationship? Well, I can tell you this relationship is only as intimate as this relationship is. Ve'ele mishpatim. And these are the judgments that are connected to the 10 words. The 10 words are your covenant, which says, honey bunny, whatever you say, I will do. It's your wedding vows. That's what the 10 words are, what we call the 10 commandments. Although, if we thought that your vows at your wedding were commandments, like you better or else, oh boy, that's not going to be a fun marriage. You remember that day? That was a day when you said, whatever you say, I'll do. He's reminding us, you want intimacy? It's demonstrated this way. Don't forget, you owed a debt. You were bought. Now you're to serve. You're to learn skills. And then you'd be set free to do as he did to you. Don't just sit underneath his care and just say, oh, your grace is so sufficient and you're just like a warm blanket on a cold Michigan night. Please don't do that. Because then you're not going to hear, well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. I'll make you ruler over much. See, these 53 commands that are given, these 53 situations that are given, they're all dealing with our relationships this way, which create intimacy this way. The question for you and me, as we continue to keep growing in our relationship with him, is, am I willing to say whatever you say, I will do, even if I don't understand it? Am I willing to trust him enough So I got to do what I need to do. I've got a basic rule here at Faith Works, like we might have a late night going, and I never stay late. I say, good night, got to go to bed. I was jokingly but seriously say, I got to go and get beauty rest because I get up early in the morning, because my highest priority is my time with God. I love this, but this is nothing compared to that. But then again, this is nothing without this. So I need this and I need this in order for this to become intimate and to become like this. Got it? Let me end the call for the evening. Wish you a great week and open it up for any types of questions or comments that you've got.